In early May 1941, Germany planned an unprecedented airborne assault to capture the Greek island of Crete. The operation, codenamed Operation Mercury, was designed to seize key airfields and strategic positions on the island to allow a full-scale occupation. The German High Command knew that the assault would be extremely risky. Crete was defended by a mixture of British, Australian, and New Zealand troops, reinforced by Greek units, and local civilians were prepared to resist fiercely. Intelligence indicated that the defenders were well equipped, positioned in strong defensive terrain, and familiar with the island's mountainous landscape. To execute the operation, Germany deployed thousands of Fallschirmjäger paratroopers, hundreds of transport aircraft, gliders, and supporting artillery units. The plan called for simultaneous seizures of multiple airfields, enabling reinforcements to arrive quickly. Success depended entirely on speed, surprise, and coordination. Preparations were intense. Troops trained in rapid deployment, briefings were held on terrain, enemy positions, and potential hazards. Paratroopers were told that casualties would be high, but the strategic value of Crete as a base in the Mediterranean justified the risk. By May 19, 1941, the German forces were fully prepared, and the Luftwaffe had established air superiority over Crete. The stage was set for a battle that would become one of the most dangerous and costly airborne operations in history. On the morning of May 20, 1941, the first wave of German paratroopers descended over Crete. Thousands of Fallschirmjäger jumped from transport aircraft, landing near key targets, including the airfields at Melim, Heraklion, and Rethymno. The defenders were prepared. Allied troops opened heavy machine gun fire, and artillery shells exploded around the descending paratroopers. Many Germans were killed or wounded before even hitting the ground. Parachutes snagged on trees, rocks, and buildings, adding to the chaos. Despite the fierce resistance, small groups of paratroopers regrouped and attempted to secure landing zones. Fighting was intense and disorganized at first. In towns and villages, local civilians joined the battle, throwing stones and using whatever weapons they could find against the invaders. The German strategy relied on capturing airfields quickly to bring in reinforcements. At Melim airfield, the defenders initially repelled several attacks, but miscommunications and cautious movements allowed German forces to establish a small foothold. This foothold would prove decisive in the days to come. The first day of fighting demonstrated the extreme danger of airborne assaults. German casualties were high, but their persistence and determination set the stage for the critical phase of the operation. As the first wave of German paratroopers landed, Crete erupted into chaos. The combination of rough terrain, scattered landings, and heavy defensive fire made coordination nearly impossible. Units were separated, supplies were lost, and many soldiers found themselves isolated behind enemy lines. Despite these challenges, small German groups pressed forward, attempting to capture villages, roads, and key positions. Skirmishes erupted in streets, fields, and hillsides. Local civilians frequently engaged the invaders, often using improvised weapons, creating further confusion for the paratroopers. At the Melim airfield, German forces struggled to secure the perimeter. Allied defenders were well positioned, using trenches and machine gun nests to repel repeated attacks. However, a critical miscommunication among the Allied command prevented timely reinforcements from supporting the frontline units. The Germans adapted quickly. Leaders organized isolated soldiers into ad hoc fighting groups, focusing on objectives like bridges, roads, and communication centers. Their training and discipline allowed them to endure heavy casualties while maintaining the push towards strategic points. By the end of the day, the battle had set a grim precedent. Crete would not be taken easily, and both sides were already paying a heavy price in men and material. The Melim airfield became the focal point of the battle. German paratroopers understood that controlling it was essential to bring in reinforcements and heavy equipment. The first day had left the defenders in control, but casualties and disorganization weakened their positions. German units, despite being scattered and reduced in number, launched repeated attacks on the airfield. Allied soldiers held their ground, firing from trenches and fortified positions, inflicting severe losses. However, the Germans exploited every weakness, taking advantage of gaps in the defensive lines. A pivotal moment occurred when the commanding officer of the Allied forces at Malines mistakenly withdrew some units from the front line, believing they were under greater threat elsewhere. This created a small but critical gap that German forces were able to exploit. Once the Germans gained even a foothold on the western side of the airfield, they could call in transport aircraft, bringing in reinforcements, heavy weapons, and supplies. This dramatically shifted the balance of power in favor of the invaders. By the end of May 20th, the Malines airfield had become a contested battlefield, and German control of even a small section marked the beginning of a strategic advantage that would ultimately decide the fate of Crete. With a foothold secured at Malines airfield, German commanders quickly coordinated the arrival of reinforcements. Transport aircraft began landing troops, artillery, and supplies, despite intense fire from Allied defenders and anti-aircraft guns. The arrival of reinforcements was crucial. Paratroopers who had been isolated and exhausted were now supported by fresh soldiers and heavier weapons. This allowed the Germans to expand their control around the airfield and push into nearby villages. Allied forces attempted counterattacks, but communication difficulties and the fragmented nature of their defense limited effectiveness. In addition, the rugged terrain hindered movement, making it difficult to coordinate large-scale responses. On the first full day after the landing, German forces began to secure roads and strategic positions leading from the airfield toward the center of Crete. This allowed additional waves of troops to land and strengthen the German presence on the island. Despite the mounting pressure, the defenders refused to retreat completely. Small pockets of Allied soldiers continued to resist in mountainous regions, engaging in skirmishes and ambushes that slowed the German advance but could not prevent it. While the Germans consolidated their hold around Malines airfield, Allied and Cretan forces regrouped in the mountainous regions of the island. These areas provided natural defensive positions, making it difficult for the Germans to advance quickly. Local civilians played a significant role in the resistance. Armed with knives, farming tools, and a few firearms, they harassed German patrols, ambushed supply lines, and gathered intelligence for the Allied forces. Their knowledge of the terrain gave them a tactical advantage in guerrilla-style attacks. The German paratroopers, trained for rapid assault rather than prolonged mountain warfare, faced unexpected challenges. Communication between isolated units was limited, and the rough terrain slowed the movement of reinforcements and heavy weapons. Despite these obstacles, German commanders emphasized discipline and coordination. Small teams were sent to clear villages, secure key passes, and protect supply lines, allowing the main force to push toward the central parts of the island. By the second day of the invasion, it was clear that while the Germans held the airfields, control of the island would require brutal and persistent effort, as the defenders used every advantage offered by the mountains and the support of local populations. While Malines became the focal point, German forces simultaneously targeted the airfields at Heraklion and Rethymno. These landings were intended to prevent Allied forces from regrouping and to secure the island's western and central areas. The landings at Heraklion faced fierce resistance. British and Commonwealth troops had fortified the airfield with trenches, machine guns, and anti-aircraft positions. German paratroopers were met with a hail of bullets as they descended, suffering heavy casualties upon landing. At Rethymno, glider-borne troops attempted a surprise assault. Initial success was limited due to effective defensive fire, and many soldiers were killed or captured. Despite this, German units slowly pushed forward, using cover and nightfall to regroup and launch renewed attacks. Communication difficulties and fragmented landings complicated German coordination. Leaders had to rely on small, ad hoc units to achieve objectives, often improvising under fire. Every inch gained was paid for with significant losses. By the third day of the invasion, German forces held Maleme but faced continued stiff resistance at Heraklion and Rethymno, demonstrating that the capture of Crete would not be simple and would exact a heavy toll on both soldiers and civilians. The key to the German success on Crete remained the Maleme airfield. By May 21, German forces had fully reinforced their positions there, bringing in artillery, mortars, and additional troops. This allowed them to expand control toward surrounding villages and roads, gradually isolating Allied defenders. The Allies, despite courage and determination, struggled to respond. Miscommunication and exhaustion limited their ability to launch effective counterattacks. Attempts to retake the airfield were repelled by well-positioned German machine guns and mortars. The capture of Maleme airfield marked a turning point. With the ability to fly in reinforcements and heavy weapons, the Germans could project power across western Crete, while the defenders were increasingly confined to mountainous regions and isolated pockets. Local Cretan fighters continued to resist fiercely, harassing German patrols, cutting supply lines, and aiding retreating Allied soldiers. Their involvement significantly increased German casualties and slowed the advance, but ultimately could not prevent the tide from turning. By the end of May 21, German control of Maleme allowed a steady flow of troops and equipment, making the eventual capture of Crete more achievable despite high losses. With Maleme airfield secure, German commanders focused on linking their forces across Crete. Units from Maleme advanced along roads and through villages, connecting with smaller landing parties at Heraklion and Rethymno. The Allies continued to resist in pockets, particularly in mountainous areas where terrain provided defensive advantages. Ambushes and guerrilla-style attacks slowed German progress, but without sufficient reinforcements, the defenders could not hold strategic positions. German paratroopers, despite suffering heavy casualties, adapted to the harsh environment. Commanders organized coordinated assaults on remaining strongholds, utilizing mortars, artillery, and small infantry squads to outflank defensive positions. Civilian resistance persisted, particularly in villages, but German forces were relentless. Their superior training, coordination, and ability to call in reinforcements from Maleme airfield gradually tipped the balance. By May 22, German forces had begun to dominate key areas of the island, though fierce fighting continued. The capture of Crete would require continued sacrifice, determination, and adaptation to both enemy action and the island's difficult terrain. By May 23, the Allied defenders were stretched thin. Repeated German attacks, combined with the relentless pressure from the air and artillery, had worn down their strength. Communication lines were disrupted, and reinforcements were unable to arrive in time. In the mountainous regions, small groups of soldiers continued to resist, ambushing German patrols and slowing advances. However, without control of key roads and airfields, their efforts could not stop the broader German offensive. The German strategy focused on consolidating captured positions while maintaining pressure on remaining defensive strongholds. Their ability to resupply and reinforce via Maleme airfield gave them a decisive logistical advantage. Facing mounting casualties and the threat of encirclement, Allied commanders began planning a strategic withdrawal. Evacuations by sea were organized, primarily from southern beaches, allowing troops to escape to Egypt. Civilians also aided in hiding soldiers and providing intelligence on German movements. By late May 23, it was clear that Crete was slipping from Allied control, and the Germans, despite heavy losses, were consolidating gains that would eventually lead to full occupation of the island. The Battle of Crete came at a tremendous cost for both sides. German paratroopers, despite their eventual success, suffered extraordinarily high casualties, the highest for any airborne operation during World War II. Thousands were killed, wounded, or captured during landings and subsequent assaults. Allied and Cretan forces also endured heavy losses. Soldiers were killed in combat, and civilians who resisted faced reprisals. Entire villages suffered during the occupation, as German forces sought to punish resistance and maintain control. The high German casualty rate forced a re-evaluation of airborne operations. Hitler himself concluded that large-scale parachute assaults were too costly, and Germany largely avoided such operations for the remainder of the war. Despite the losses, the Germans achieved their strategic objectives. Key airfields were secured, Allied forces were forced to withdraw, and Crete was effectively occupied. The battle demonstrated both the effectiveness of airborne tactics under certain conditions and the human cost of strategic gains, leaving a lasting mark on military planning and the memory of the island. Throughout the Battle of Crete, local Cretans played a critical role in resisting the German invasion. Armed with simple weapons like knives, farming tools, and a few firearms, civilians engaged in guerrilla attacks against paratroopers, ambushed supply lines, and provided intelligence to Allied forces. Their involvement, while courageous, came at a steep cost. German forces, facing unexpected resistance, carried out reprisals against villages and towns suspected of aiding the defenders. Homes were burned, and civilians were executed or imprisoned, instilling fear but failing to fully suppress local resistance. These actions highlighted the complexity of occupying hostile territory, where local populations could significantly influence the outcome of military operations. The Germans had tactical superiority in weapons and training, yet the combination of Allied soldiers and determined civilians made the campaign prolonged and bloody. The civilian resistance also contributed to slowing German consolidation across the island. Supply lines were constantly threatened, and isolated German units had to devote manpower to guard against ambushes, reducing their offensive strength. By the end of the battle, the role of Cretan civilians was widely recognized as a vital factor in prolonging the defense, even though they could not prevent the eventual German victory. By the end of May 1941, Crete had fallen under German control. The capture of the island marked a strategic victory for Germany, providing a base for operations in the eastern Mediterranean and threatening Allied supply routes to North Africa. German forces immediately began consolidating their positions, fortifying airfields, securing towns, and establishing garrisons across key points of the island. The military presence was designed to prevent Allied counterattacks and to maintain control over both urban and rural areas. The high cost of the battle left a lasting impression. German commanders were acutely aware of the extraordinary casualties suffered by the Fallschirmjäger, and this influenced future military planning. Hitler, in particular, became wary of large-scale airborne operations due to the heavy losses. Despite the occupation, resistance continued. Cretan civilians, supported by remaining Allied forces, carried out sabotage, intelligence gathering, and guerrilla attacks throughout the island. German soldiers faced ongoing harassment, and supply lines remained under constant threat. Crete's occupation demonstrated that even after a tactical victory, controlling hostile terrain against determined defenders, both military and civilian, was a long and challenging endeavor. The Battle of Crete left important lessons for both the Germans and the Allies. For Germany, it highlighted the strengths and limitations of airborne operations. While paratroopers could achieve surprise and seize critical objectives, the extremely high casualties made such operations unsustainable on a large scale. For the Allies, the battle emphasized the value of terrain, local knowledge, and civilian involvement. Cretan resistance demonstrated that even a well-trained military force could be slowed and disrupted by determined local populations familiar with the land. The Germans also recognized the importance of intelligence and communication. Misjudgments and miscommunications among Allied units, especially at Maleme Airfield, contributed significantly to the German victory. Conversely, Allied commanders realized that better coordination might have prevented the rapid loss of key positions. Despite the tactical victory, the Germans faced ongoing difficulties in maintaining control of Crete. Guerrilla attacks, sabotage, and constant vigilance against counterattacks consumed resources and manpower, underscoring the challenges of occupation even after battlefield success. The battle became a pivotal study for military strategists worldwide, influencing airborne and defensive planning for the remainder of World War II. The Battle of Crete remains one of the most remarkable airborne operations of World War II. It showcased the courage, skill, and determination of German paratroopers, as well as the resilience and bravery of Allied forces and local Cretan civilians. Despite achieving victory, Germany paid a heavy price, with thousands of paratroopers killed or wounded. Hitler himself concluded that large-scale airborne assaults were too costly, which shaped future German military strategy. For the Allies and the local population, the battle became a symbol of resistance and tenacity. Guerrilla operations continued throughout the occupation, demonstrating that victory on the battlefield did not mean complete control over the island. The battle also provided lasting lessons in strategy, logistics, and the human cost of war. Commanders on both sides learned about the importance of terrain, intelligence, communication, and civilian involvement in combat operations. Today, the Battle of Crete is remembered as a cautionary tale and a testament to bravery, highlighting how courage and determination on both sides can shape history, even when the odds are extreme.